Good morning. Hey, I'm Conservative Cat. We're digging really, really deep today into the Belt and Road Initiative. This is China's $1 trillion global infrastructure push. And I talked a little bit about Africa being the crown jewel of this strategy. Africa, strategically, they want it, and they want these military ports. Really, that's what these are. They want Africa because it's close to Europe, and then they want South America because it's close to North America, us, the United States. So they've been building ports in Kenya, Djibouti, Tanzania. I think I'm saying that correctly. I don't know, but they've been building these ports here. Okay, and these are geopolitical footholds. And joining me here to break it all down, I'm really excited to have him on, Ray Estrada. Good morning, Ray. How are you?
Doing great. Good morning, Kat. How are you?
I'm doing great. So Ray Estrada, tell us a little bit about yourself. You ran in the 17th Congressional District against Eric Swanson, I think a couple of years ago at this point. And by the way, Ray, he was on the phone with me the other day. We were talking about Eric Swanson's peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I mean,
Yes.
at this point, it's got to be a fetish, right? Because I
Yeah.
went through Ray and I went on his social media. Eric Swanson, folks, he's a Democrat congressman. I went through his social media after he said that. I was just curious how many times he posted about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Like within the last couple of years, one is too many, two is like okay, and then three, four, and I counted five within the last couple of years. Now, some of them, granted, weren't just peanut butter and jelly sandwiches; they were ham sandwiches as well. But I I can't believe how many times this guy posts about his lunch. I just can't believe how many times he posts about it as a sitting congressman. And I love how you said we need to talk of something of substance, not pictures of your dog, not peanut butter jelly sandwiches. So I mean, I've been thinking about that all week, and I'm like, really, I counted. It was like 5 posts, Ray, that he talked
That's
about.
right. But I mean, that is so typical, though, of the Democrats. I mean, they will go ahead and put people in office that are total, basically, yes man or yes person, uh, and just basically, you know, sign here and push, yes, etc. So I'm not surprised about, Sorensen. Anyway, um, I I'm sure he probably said more than 6 times, about his peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But anyway, I was listening, Kat, your last segment, and it's very sad and unfortunate of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess it ties into the left and how they call basically, a health risk, young people risking their lives, and they call it health care. But anyway, what you were bringing up, talking about, China and Latin America. And thank you for having this segment and thank you for bringing attention to this. I think it's necessary. I think that so often we have so many things going on in our micro lives. Let's say we don't think about the big picture and what's going on outside, our immediate environment. Meanwhile, we have, countries like China who are basically gobbling up and, ports, as you were mentioning, and other infrastructures in different parts of the world. And like you said, this is part of their Belt in Road initiative, which is kind of like the new version of the Silk, trade. Um, but anyway, let's, talking about the trade, what is going on in Latin America. Latin America historically has been very close to the United States regarding basically cultural, issues, its history, faith. We know we pray to the same God. Most of us there, are Christians. But unfortunately, we had a lot of problems during the Cold War, as you know. We had proxy wars in Latin America. I mean, South America as well as Central America, from the former, Soviet Union and the United States. But now China has seen an opening, and it's been doing this for the last decade. I would say actually more than the last decade. The United States has not been too engaged or not engaged enough in what's going on there. And I'll bring up, Brazil as an example. Uh, Brazil, their number one trading partner now. is China. By their bilateral trade is like $160 billion versus like 70 billion with the United States. Now, what happens in that sense? Brazil will go ahead and export, agricultural commodities and minerals, to China. China will go ahead and bring to Brazil finished products. So the added value, obviously, they're the ones that are making, most of the money. Now, in like you were mentioning the ports, look what's going on in Panama. And by the way, that deal that BlackRock is going to buy the two ports, the there's one in the Pacific and one in the Atlantic, right there at the entrance and exit basically of the Panama Canal. That hasn't gone through yet. That hasn't happened yet. I mean, BlackRock was doing a proposal to buy, I think, like 43 different ports around the world in like 23 different countries for like $24 billion. I mean, some huge amount of money. But the way that China has been coming into Latin America, yes, they're incentivizing them with trade, giving them like free trade, agreements. I mean, so that they are favored in not paying tariffs into, bringing their country, their products into China. But this is interesting. A lot of the companies that are exporting to China from Latin America are owned by China. So
Oh,
I mean, that's amazing. I mean, in Brazil, they bought this mining company. So say, oh, Brazil owns this mining company, but it's actually owned by China, even though it's a Brazilian mining company. Now I'll put an example like in Nicaragua, for example. They're helping remodel this airport. That's what you would read in the media. They're spending like $400 million. The airport that they're doing right now is a military airport that was done by Russia during the Cold War when Russia was trying to bring in MiGs into Nicaragua. If you remember, in the 80s, there was a heated war in Nicaragua, the Sandinistas versus, the Contras. And Ronald Reagan basically told Nicaragua, if you bring in the, MiGs, we're going to take them out immediately. But that airport basically has been abandoned. It's a military installation. Now, China is saying, well, we're going to go ahead and help Nicaragua open up to the world by allowing, bigger planes to come in there. So they are going to invest, in that project. They're building roads in Costa Rica. They wanted to, excuse me, Panama. They were proposing a high-speed railway from Panama into Costa Rica. All of this is done with loans. Again, has a catch. Those projects are done by Chinese companies.
So these nations are owned. Okay, so it's that what it's called is debt trap diplomacy. So they're buying, like they're literally taking over. And there's a string attached to all of this infrastructure that they're promising these nations. And like you were saying about I've heard of this before where, and you talk to manufacturers and they'll just say, well, it's just so much cheaper to get copper, for example. Manufacturers will say, we really need copper, but they'll just give it to us. I mean, where you can melt down copper and sell it, like it's cheaper than if you were to melt it down and sell it off. It's cheaper than like the actual value of the copper, if that makes sense. And maybe
No, it makes perfect sense. And what you're saying is the value added when they process, this mineral, this industrial metal commodity, right? Like copper, zinc, lithium. I mean, all of these things that people mine there in Latin America, the value added to those products, to those commodities, do not happen in that country. It happens after they are exported. Now,
yes.
China is gobbling up all of that. Now, if we can say that they have unfair trade, with Latin America, and they are basically ripping them off with these high interest loans and all these conditions, that's not nice. I mean, that's terrible. But at the end of the day, that's not the problem. The problem is their geopolitical influence and how it's affecting the United States and potentially the national security of the United States. And that's the big issue. What's going on in Panama, that's a threat to national security here in the United States. Now, geopolitically, their influence every year it keeps advancing. And I will give you an example of this. Taiwan, the one China policy. They have really been pushing this in Latin America. And one by one, if people have been paying attention, they would notice that country after country, they are breaking relations with Taiwan and they are adopting the one China policy. Why? Because they're incentivized, and unfortunately, there are quite a few, corrupt political leaders. I mean, some of these people are making 50,000 a year, being in Congress. They're in in some of these countries in Latin America, and here you have China and say, "Hey, I'll give you $10 million if you go ahead and vote this way. If you give us this concession." The mining concessions that they have been getting, excuse me, is worth billions of dollars. Again, they pay off. Again, this is speculation because now I cannot document this, but I know from different sources they will go ahead and buy the politicians to put on their laws that will favor China.
Hmm. Yeah, well, and it's shocking to see some of these activist judges working so hard to shut down these tariffs because really, I think the tariffs, it's just to stop the bleeding for right now and to make it harder for China to do this kind of stuff. And really, it's just to level the playing field. But uh, I think it's interesting. They're selling us the copper, like for example, in this manufacturing, they're selling us the copper at a loss to them, but it's really not a loss because it's the political influence and this consumerism. So we've really done a great job, or they've really done a great job convincing Americans that, hey, take the cheaper route, and use us. Rely on us, and we'll give you this cheaper product uh, as long as you rely on us for that cheaper product. And I think that consumerism has consumed Americans and a lot of these maybe leftist politicians. They don't quite realize that, hey, this isn't just because they want to give you free crap. The
Mhm.
Chinese Communist Party, they don't want to just, oh yeah, we're going to give you cheap copper because we like you guys. No, this is done strategically so that way there is a reliance on the CCP for our products and for our supply chain. And they are creating a
Yes.
global supply chain. And I don't see this going any other way besides war. I really think that the tariffs at this point is to stop a full-blown globalist war from breaking out. And I think that's
I
what.
hope, yeah, let's pray that that doesn't happen. But, what you're saying is so true, Kat. And it's typical, and that's their business model, China. They will go ahead and take a loss. It's kind of, to put it into more simple terms, like you see grocery stores, they have a loss leader. So they sell you something cheap, but then they stick it to you with something else. Well, basically, that's it. Look at what's going on, with iron, the metal industry here in the United States. Thank God for Donald Trump. China was dumping, steel here into the United States, and American manufacturing, couldn't compete with that.
Mhm.
So again, thank God for Donald Trump, right? For President Trump.
And people
Now,
think that he's so dumb, Ray. And like that's what really gets me going is when you know all of this stuff, the Greenland, the talk about Canada, the talk about the Panama Canal, and he's working so that way we don't have to rely on China for their supply chain. And he's trying to create our own supply chain. And I think that people like, oh, Donald Trump's talking about buying Canada or buying Greenland. Like, what a crazy guy. And it's like,
mhm,
wait a second, wait a second. We need
yeah,
minerals. We need minerals and we need to do our own thing. So that way we don't have to rely on China. And that's what he's doing because it's Greenland is rich in minerals. Canada is rich in minerals. And we could be doing that but
yes,
the left would rather get hooked on this like orange man bad thing. And I'm just like, he's such a genius, honestly. When you look at his policies and you
yes,
understand this, you're like, gosh, this is just so smart.
I
Um,
think so. And I think part of President Trump's model to negotiate is like shock and awe. Like he puts it up there so high, such high expectations that then even if he brings it down to fifth, half of that's still a great deal, right? And
Mhm.
I think thank God that he sees. I think he has a very clear vision of the threat of China and the threat of China in Latin America through trade, through geopolitical, geopolitical, let's say, not engagement, but they want to conquer basically all of that region geopolitically affecting the national security of the United States. How have they been doing that? Like you were mentioning, deep water ports, like in Peru, Panama. So they're owning that infrastructure. Trade, they want to present themselves as an alternative option, alternative trading partner for these countries in Latin America, you know, from Europe and the United States. They have already done that in Brazil. Brazil, their main partner is now China. It's not the United States. And this trend continues to go on year after year. If people pay attention to the bilateral trade between some of these countries, with China, and then they go ahead and compare them with the United States, they're going to see that the United States either it's not growing or it's decreasing. Now, that's also a problem when a country like China has this much economic influence in different countries. Again, they gain geopolitical stance, geopolitical importance, relevance here in our hemisphere. And that's the problem. And a testimony to that is what was going on in Panama, that they owned, the Cristobal port and the Balboa port, two huge powerhouses. One of them, the main port coming in from Asia, coming into this hemisphere, and the other one coming in from Europe, coming into this hemisphere. So that's very important. Now, people will argue, well, it's a Hong Kong company, the Hutchinson Group, that owns it. That's actually not true. That's actually, always everything in business is dependent and subject to the will of the CCP. Period. Whoever doesn't get that, unfortunately, they're not well informed. But at this point, I think it's a poor excuse not to be informed about something so critical,
Mhm.
right? Now, BlackRock, they said that they were going to go ahead and buy that. To date, that hasn't happened. All right. So Trump was right to go ahead and pressure Panama. Now, my opinion is that the only way to secure, because we have right now the Senate, and in the House, and we have the White House, and look how many obstacles are put in front of President Trump right now for him to execute any aspect of his agenda: immigration, national security,
Mhm.
trade, things that belong solely to him. The
The chair.
judges are interfering. Interesting that you brought up the judges. Because
Congress
that,
has to do their job.
yes,
Congress.
but they haven't done it. I mean, we have, on one side, you have the rhinos, the so-called Republicans that are hypocrites and they're obsessed with keeping their jobs, right? And then on the other side, you have the, psychos. I mean, I shouldn't use that language. Those people that are radical to the left. And then
Yeah.
in between, you have the conservatives, the MAGA. People think that the MAGAs are extreme. I think that the MAGAs are actually, regular people that have common sense and they just want to live their life in peace, and say the republic. But anyway,
Well,
so
I
thank
think
you for, go ahead.
I think that there is an issue with the MAGA conservatives as well. There's a lot of focus on, and rightfully so, I mean, the gender issues and things like that, a lot of these social issues that I feel like are always talked about. I never hear the mainstream talk about what you're talking about, Ray. I never hear it. They don't talk about this. They always say, oh, Donald Trump and his crazy ideas to buy Greenland, but they refuse to have this conversation as to why he wants it. And the gender issues, all of this kind of taking front stage, which 100% like we need to address that. But I'm worried that there is a lack of focus on geopolitics, especially coming from folks like Eric Swartzen, like he
Yeah.
doesn't have any kind of conversations about that. And we're so focused on like these programs and internal domestic programs that we're forgetting that this is a looming threat and um, that we need to focus on making sure China doesn't secure this global supply chain and make everybody reliant on them for everything. And
Yes.
so,
And that has been the trend, unfortunately. I mean, look about the drug industry. Um, I mean, that to me is alarming that we're not producing our own, our own meds, our own medication, within the United States. That's
yeah,
something that
20,
is totally unexcusable. You
in
know,
2020, we didn't even have the basic like PP, what is it, PPP and like masks. We didn't even have
Mhm.
that, and we couldn't even make that ourselves. We had to go rely on other countries to make that. And we were out of masks, we were out of toilet paper. Just think about that, and then amplify it by 10,000 if we don't address this, right?
Yes, I think everything matters. It's like a puzzle, and we have to keep putting the pieces together. It's not like a one thing, one issue problem. We're discussing, Latin America, China's influence in Latin America. That is a threat to national security. Don't doubt that. It's beyond just a trade. It's also geopolitics, as I mentioned. They have influenced and continue to influence the political stance of these countries, like regarding Taiwan. A lot of those countries have now revoked, they have totally um, canceled, let's say, any relationship, diplomatic relationship with Taiwan. And these are countries that were traditionally very conservative and, leaning, to the right, who had great relationships with Taiwan. But unfortunately, that's just testimony of the influence that has been growing within these countries, from China. Um, I think it's very important because it's not just about trade, as I mentioned, but also national security. At some point, Kat, we can discuss, what's happening in Venezuela, for example, in Tren de Aragua. Uh, that is a very, very intentional operation by Venezuela. Iran is engaged with this. China is also engaged with this, and we can discuss that in detail, perhaps in another occasion.
Uh-huh. Cool.
How Tren de Aragua has totally infiltrated the United States, that they have operatives here in the United States. Right now, they are catching what you see on TV, basically low level threats, which are just like gangbangers. But the threat of these people is much greater than what you see on TV. And unfortunately, some members of, let's say, the intelligence community, they knew about this, and they allegedly, let's say, let these people in here, knowing, having been warned that they were coming into the United States, and they let it happen. I have no idea why the Biden administration allowed this to happen, but this was by design.
Yeah.
Believe it,
Well,
there's a lot that we can talk about that.
there's
And how,
military like deals, cooperation deals with Venezuela that China has made, and those are public. People know about these deals, and despite that, members of the intelligence community, they let them in, and
yeah,
the Biden administration. But
some of the deals are public, Kat, and some of the deals are not public.
yeah,
For example, you never hear about the relationship between Venezuela and Iran and the minerals that Iran is mining in Venezuela, and they're shipping by thousands of tons to their country, to Iran.
okay,
So there's quite a bit of stuff going on. So I hope, and perhaps some of these
yeah,
people will listen to this show. I know that I have tried to share a lot of information about this. So let's hope that it doesn't fall on deaf ears.
yeah,
But these people that have totally neglected this situation have put the United States, let's say, in peril. There is a legitimate threat, to national security from China and from other countries. But I know today we're discussing, China and Latin America. So I think it's very important. I think it's awesome that you
Mhm.
you went ahead and did the show.
Yeah, yeah, yes. Well, I appreciate you coming on. And real quick before we go, what do you think, Ray? If you were in Congress, and I wish you'd run again. I know you're not running again, but I wish you would. What do you think Congress can do? Like, what would you do the moment you're in Congress and you had all? I mean, they do have all the power. I mean, we have the House and the Senate, but like you said, the rhinos and then the extreme left. Um, what would you do? What's the first step?
Regarding China and Latin America,
Yeah, obviously, you've got
yes.
Donald Trump trying to tariff, but the courts are not. So how does Congress kind of step in and help Donald?
Well, I think very simple. One of the most important things I think that people overlook is the Foreign Service, the Department of State. They are full of bureaucrats that have no concern or intention to change any of the pre-Trump policies in different countries. You have a group of diplomats who basically are career bureaucrats who do not care to make any changes to implement the policies of Donald Trump. For example, and I don't want to talk about anyone specific, but I know several ambassadors in Latin America right now who are outright leftists, bureaucrats who used to work for Democrat senators and congressmen that basically just got that job there as a diplomat working at the embassies. And what they are doing, they are telling the State Department and telling Trump basically why they cannot push the Trump agenda into these countries instead of engaging with the countries that are where they're serving and telling them why they need to make these changes. Saying this is how we're going to make these changes. No longer the status quo. Well, in our country, we don't do that. I'll give you an example. Look what happened with Colombia when Colombia didn't want to take back their criminals. Trump said, no, you are going to take it, period. That's it. The ambassador would say, well, we can't do that, sir, because, that's not how they do things here. The heck with that. It's not how they do things here or how they do things there. If it's relating to the United States, national security and the United States foreign policy, they have to go ahead and, tell these people, or engage with them at least, let's say, and say, this is why we have to do this and this is how we're going to do it. But
Mhm.
I mean, unfortunately, I had the experience of, meeting with a lot of these people, and they will sit there at the table and say, well, we can't do that because that will be insensitive and disrespectful, to their sovereignty. You rarely see these leftist, liberal, people representing the United States abroad saying that they are going to go ahead and push, the United States agenda and the
Mhm.
United States foreign policies. That I think would be a big thing that they have to change the culture in the State Department.
Mhm.
Something else, sanctions, absolutely sanctions. You know what else is very powerful, Kat?
Mhm.
All of these people, they all have money in the United States. A lot of these government officials there in Venezuela, a lot of those people travel here. Their family have penthouses in New York, and the United States is not doing anything about that. I said, no, take, go ahead and seize that money, or at least investigate where that money's come from. I can tell you it's not from working 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Look at Maduro. Maduro used to be a bus driver making like $300 a month. Now the guy is a multi-billionaire.
Mhm.
His kids travel Europe. They have property all over the world. Nobody's doing anything about it. So what would I do? I would go ahead and push to go ahead and seize that money. Also cancel the visas of all of those government officials.
Yeah.
Period. We don't need to have an excuse, or a reason. The reason is United States national security. Period. But too many apologies, too many BS, too much BS.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Would
I
be
meant too many BSers. But there's too much BS in that. That's what would need to be done. I
man.
mean, one of the aspects. But anyway, you got me going there, Kat. Sorry about that.
Nope. I appreciate you coming on, Ray, and I'm gonna have you back on, and we'll talk about Venezuela and the military cooperation deals with China.
There's a lot to talk about that.
To talk about. Ray, you have a blessed rest of your morning, and I appreciate you joining the show.
Thank you. God bless you as well. And thank you for your wonderful work. Take
God
care.
bless you. God bless you. All right, folks, that's been Conservative Cat. I appreciate you tuning in each every single day. And be sure 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. It's a daily show, Central Time. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, follow us on Rumble, follow me on Facebook, and go to patriotpumpenergy.com. Buy your pre-workout today. Promo code Conservative Cat, $10 off. And we'll be back again tomorrow morning. Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.